right, and I'm going to say officially we can get started. Hello, Reverend Nicole Garcia. I am so looking forward to our conversation here today. Welcome. I'm going to read a little bit about you so our listeners can hear about who you are. The Reverend Nicole Garcia, MA, LPC. Reverend Nicole is an ordained minister of Word and Sacrament in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. She is also a therapist and clinical supervisor at an LGBTQIA focused counseling center called the Umbrella Collective. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you this morning, or at least it's morning when we're recording.
Yes, yes. Well, to give a little bit of context, I discovered you through watching the Netflix series Coming Out Colton, which, to be honest, I'm a little embarrassed to say that I was watching because it is about The Bachelor and his journey on coming out as a gay man. And I know there's a lot of controversy kind of surrounding his story. I've watched The Bachelor since I was like probably 17 years old. And when Coming Out Colton came out, I had to watch it. And, you know, for those of you who aren't aware of Colton and his story, he was the Bachelor on a season and got into a relationship with a woman. There was a lot of toxic, really abusive behavior that was going on. And after the show was through, he, shortly after their breakup, came out as gay. And so this Netflix series was really documenting his journey on coming out, talking to his family about it, wrestling with his faith, and coming to terms with what he did. And I want to read, I want to read a quote from you, Reverend, that you said that I thought when you were interviewed by Netflix that you said about this, and you agreeing to be on the show. You said, a white man comes out as gay and he gets a docuseries, whereas so many people who are BIPOC come out and lose jobs, lose families. The suicide ideation rate is so high in this community, and far too many people don't find the support that they really need and anticipate. So to have Colton come out and not only get a lot of support, which I really, really am glad, but a Netflix series, I agreed to appear as long as I could tell my truth. If I get this opportunity to speak, I'm going to speak the truth. And I believe that's what I did. So tell me a little bit about your decision to be on the show and kind of how you saw this whole experience.
Well, like most people, I spend a bit of time on social media every day. And so, this incident appeared on my Facebook feed about this white man getting a Netflix series, and it was a travesty. And honestly, I've never been one to watch reality TV. So I've heard of The Bachelor. I think I may have seen a few of the Bachelor at some point in the long history, but I've never been a fan. And so, but I had an idea of how the show was put together and how it ran. So I read a lot of the information and kind of filed it away. And then I got a phone call from a friend who asked me to have a conversation with somebody about something that couldn't be talked about. I'm like, okay, but this friend was very reliable and trusted, and it's one of the few people whom I will say, well, if you want to have a conversation with somebody, I can't tell you what it's about, but you have this conversation. Probably one out of three people in the world where I will say, okay, I'll have a conversation. And it turned out to be a producer from the company that was making this series, and we had a very frank and honest and open conversation. And I decided I would go ahead and do this series because everyone's story is important. All of us have a story of how our lives are put together. I'm a therapist, and I consider myself primarily a narrative therapist. And part of the work that I do, I'm also a transgender woman, and I work primarily with people going through transition. And so I've walked with several hundred trans and non-binary people as they begin their gender transition. And we all have our own unique stories that we try and live into, and stories of who we really should be. And when I heard and read a lot about Colton, I saw some parallels to my own story. I, for so many years, tried to be who everyone told me I should be and who I thought I should be. I
Mhm.
was born the oldest son in a Roman Catholic Latino family. I knew my place. I was supposed to get married, I was supposed to have kids, and that's what I tried to live into for most of my life. But it took a tremendous toll on me. I ended up working for the state prison system. And so I ended up in uniform wearing a badge, and then started working as a parole officer, carrying a badge and a gun, trying to prove to everyone around me and prove to myself that I was really a man. And that failed miserably.
Mhm.
I just ended up being abusing substances, alcohol primarily, abusing alcohol to run away from the truth I was hiding. I was became very angry, and for some reason, my wife at the time didn't want to be married to an angry drunk man, and I blamed her for everything I was going through. So we ended up getting divorced. And I bought my own house, and within 6 months, I came to terms with the fact that I am, in fact, a woman. I
Mhm.
always have been. I pretended to be a male my entire life. So when I read about um, Colton's journey, I saw a lot of parallels, trying so hard to fit in to this toxic masculinity that is so prevalent, especially in his life, where he is trying so hard to be a football star, a football player, and and then living into The Bachelor, trying to accentuate the toxic masculinity. There was a certain point where you just can't do it anymore.
Mhm.
It takes so much energy to pretend to be someone else that there's nothing left. Um, and so you have to make a decision. And for me, the decision was to transition. And for Colton, it was time to come out.
Mhm.
And so I did the I did the series so that he would have the opportunity to tell his story. And I also recognized that nobody was really running to me and asking me to do a Netflix series. And so I honestly took advantage of the invitation. I'm here today because I did appear on the series. So
Mhm.
I'm here today because I can talk to you about what it's like to be a QT BIPOC, a queer and trans, um, um, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous person of color. Yeah,
Mhm.
I am a person of color. I'm a woman of color.
Mhm.
And so what I face and what I've had to overcome aren't the same as Colton,
Mhm.
but I've had my own battles to fight. And I'm here because I've been given the opportunity to tell some of my story here and now because I was part of that series.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I am so glad that you were on that series. And I'm going to read a quote from you that you said to him. So, to give a little bit of context to the listeners who haven't seen it, Colton, it's an episode where he's wrestling with his faith and wondering, can I still love God? Can I still be a Christian when I am gay? And prior to talking with you, he talks to a former pastor of his. He talks to some of his friends who really took the stance of, you know, we don't agree, like love the sinner, not the sin kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and one of Colton's friends, who is also a gay man, brought, I might be muddling the details a little bit, but he ends up talking to um, uh, Christians who are in the LGBTQIA community and who are also very active in their faith. and they bring Colton to you to have a conversation with you. So he's sitting down with you and kind of tells you what's going on, where he's at. And this is what you say to him. You say, face your fears head on and know you're capable of that. Do you want to be like that again? He says, no. Then do the work. Therapy with your friends. Find out who the hell you are, not a character you portray. You've been on The Bachelor, but that doesn't identify who you are. You don't have a clue what it means to be in a healthy relationship because you've never been in a relationship as you. You've always been in a relationship as someone you're supposed to be. Who are you? The best thing you can do is work on you and face what you've done. Before you go in and fuck up someone else's life, take responsibility for what you've done and then work on not doing it again. Who are you called to be? What's in your heart? And Nicole, I was like screaming at the TV when you came on and said all of this. I was like, yes, this is amazing. I was like, I immediately Googled you. I knew I had to talk to you because you spoke such good truth in such an also direct, but yet such a gentle way. And you were able to empathize with him and yet tell him, you know, you need to do the work. You need to take accountability for what you've done. And you need to learn who you are because you've never been in a relationship as you. And I think that one thing that is so sacred about you and the trans community is that you have had to step out and be so brave in owning completely your truth and who you are. I think someone in my position, cisgender white woman, I also am on the journey of figuring out who I am, but I have so much to learn from you and the trans community, I think specifically because of the road that you've gone through and the bravery and the courage that you've had to have to actually be true to who you are. So although I know you're speaking from your experience and you're speaking to Colton, to his experience, your words impacted me as well to take responsibility. Who are you called to be? What's in your heart? So can you talk a little bit about that? What so many of us don't know who we are. And you've talked about it a little bit, but through your journey, obviously you've gone through so much to learn who you truly are and learning and stepping into who you are as a woman. What does it look like and I know you work with others who are transitioning. What does that hard work look like to own who we are? How do we live into our authentic selves?
Golly. Yes, I work with a lot of people going through gender transitions, and I work with a lot of people who have come out as identify somewhere in the LGBTQ plus community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, non-binary, trans. And for so many of us, especially those of us who are trans and non-binary, we challenge the status quo. There are a few things that for most of human history that were questions. One of them was gender. When the doctor lifts you up and looks between your legs, they will proclaim that you are male or female. And if there's any question, those who are intersex were usually forced by a doctor's choice to live into the gender that was assigned to them. And when those of us who defy that gender binary recognize that the doctor made a mistake, I can't tell you why I am trans. My mother asked me, why are you trans and why you're not gay? And it's like, I don't know. There are a lot of theories that estrogen was injected sometime during gestation when testosterone should have been injected? Or was it because my father died when I was 2, my mother remarried when I was 5, and I had a weak stepfather, traditional Freudian type of, you love your mother and hate your father type of stuff. I don't know. But when I was 43 years old, I knew in my heart I had been pretending for so long.
Mm.
And it took me a while to redefine my narrative, who I was, and understand why I did the things I did. I became a law enforcement officer in order to prove my masculinity, and that failed miserably.
Mm.
So when you're rewriting who you are, one, not every minute of my life as a man, when I lived as a man, was terrible. I have some wonderful memories. I have some dear, dear friends that I still have to this day. Um, but when I transitioned and started living into who I was truly created to be, into being, honestly, I um, transitioned to became my mother. Luckily, I love my mother, and she was a wonderful role model. But I had to redefine everything I did and everything I believed in.
Mm.
And part of that was my faith. I was raised a Roman Catholic. I left the Roman Catholic Church in my early 20s for a various number of reasons. One, the colonialism, the hierarchy, the patriarchy, and also the fact that God didn't answer my prayers. I
Mm.
prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for God to fix me, to
Mm.
make me the man that I was supposed to be. But when God didn't do that, I left the church. I didn't leave God. I just turned my back on God, said, when you're ready to start answering my prayers, then I will come back. What I figured out in my early 40s is I didn't have to be fixed. I had to live into who God actually created me to be.
Mm.
And when I did that, I felt the peace of the Lord in my heart for the first time.
Oh.
It was incredible. And I rediscovered and rekindled my faith within St. Paul Lutheran Church in downtown Denver. The pastor was gay, and Pastor Kevin also liked what we call high church, the processions and all the hymns and all the same words. So I knew all the words, they just didn't make me kneel, and I could deal with that. But what I fell in love with was Lutheran theology. And so once I really, really discovered what Luther had written about and how he had addressed the issues with the church, I became a Lutheran.
Mm.
And so it was a matter of me completely looking at the narrative that I lived for the first 42, 43 years of my life and what I had done to conform to the stereotype of the male I was supposed to be and how that failed miserably. And so I had the opportunity to rewrite my narrative
Mm.
and look deeply inside myself and what was important. The most important part to me was my faith. I
Mm.
rediscovered and could celebrate my life in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Redeemer.
Mm.
Um, so I found a home in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.
Mm.
I rediscovered that um, I could be a really good friend. I
Mm.
could be a really good companion. I ended up moving in with my mother in 2006 because I had sold my house in order to finish my transition. And my stepfather became ill. He had cancer and he passed away.
Mm.
And mama had a nice 3-bedroom house in Louisville, Colorado that I was always over helping cutting the lawn or sweeping the sidewalks. And eventually she just said, why don't you just move in? Because I was living with one of my cousins at the time. So I moved in with my mother, and we had been together for over 15 years, and she just died recently. She
Mm.
died last
Sorry.
December, on December 10th.
Mm.
But by moving in and living with my mother, she hated me being a parole officer. She just,
Mm.
because every morning I would get up, put on a badge, put on a gun, put on a bulletproof vest, and go out and cavort with convicted felons. She
Mm.
didn't like it at all. So when I
Interesting.
said, when I came to the conclusion that I had become a law enforcement officer to prove my masculinity and realized it didn't work, I didn't want that job any longer. And the part that I really enjoyed was working with people. I didn't like the law enforcement aspect. I loved working with people. So I found a master's degree in counseling at the University of Colorado, Denver, and moved into an administrative position. Started going to school part-time in the evenings to grad school and working full-time during the days. And at the same time, doing a lot of work in the ELCA around opening the doors of the church to the LGBTQ plus community.
Mhm.
And by 2013, I was on my last year of my internship of being a therapist and discerned a call to ministry and ended up in a hybrid online residential seminary program. So in August of 2013, I was an intern counselor at the CU Denver Counseling Center, and I took my first online course, Greek. It was horrible.
I've heard Greek is super intense.
Oof. I made it through Greek with a B minus, praise God. I got my master's in counseling and started working as a therapist in private practice. So I didn't do all that alone. I did it with the community around me, the community of friends who supported me. I had a really good therapist. I had a really good spiritual director and had to explore every aspect of why I was making the decisions I was making. Were they for me or were they for the glory of God? And that's what I try to do now with my clients. When I started therapy in my transition, it was essentially I had to convince a therapist that I was actually transgender. And I was going to support group meetings, and half the support group meetings are tell your therapist this, but don't tell him that. Tell him this, but don't tell him that.
Interesting.
So that therapy was more of a gatekeeping role. They were making sure that you were really, really serious about this stuff and I know how to answer questions. And then at one point, when I finally came out to my therapist through, it's an insurance company, and this was in 2003. I told, I am transgender and I need to do a gender transition. And she said, well, that means you're transsexual. I'm like, well, I guess so. Well, I can't talk to you anymore and we can't cover you any longer. Anything, the insurance plan that I had with the state at the time specifically excluded anything having to do with transsexualism.
What?
So I had to change therapists and pay for therapy out of pocket.
Oh no, that's awful.
And I don't ever want to have anybody else experience the same thing I did. Being told that you have a significant mental health disorder and that I had to be diagnosed with gender identity disorder in order to start hormones, and
Wow.
then get a second opinion from a psychologist saying that I could be diagnosed with gender identity disorder in order to have surgery. So it was just jumping through hoops, trying to say
Yeah.
the right things. And it was helpful to a point, but really it was more of, well, I better not say the wrong thing, otherwise I will be put on the wrong path.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be that type of therapist. I wanted to be a therapist that will actually walk with people through their transition because of my experience and the experience I've had with so many others. I can anticipate a little bit about what people are going through and walk through them when things get really, really, really hard. There's parts of a transition are worse than others, and people will just kind of losing, they're crying and upset. I'm like, this is the worst part. When we live in a very binary world, and if people can't walk up to you and know immediately to call you ma'am or sir, they're going to be confused. They're going to take it out on you. This won't last forever. This is a short period of time, and we're going to deal with the pain, the grief, and the trauma that other people are inflicting on you. Honestly, maybe 25 to 30% of the work with people through transition is actually coming to terms with who you are. We know who we are. We know that we were assigned the wrong gender at birth, and we know we have to live into that. And it's a matter of how we're going to do that. That is part of the work I do. But
Yeah.
upwards of 70% of the work that I do is helping to deal with the, as I call it, the shitstorm that happens around us. When parents or friends or family outright reject you,
Mm-hmm.
or when they say, "Oh, it's really really hard. I'm sorry, I can't get your name right." And they make it all about them,
Mm.
not about the person who's actually transitioning.
Mm.
It's a matter of respect. The person you love tells you, "This is the name that I'm using. These are the pronouns I am using. Please use them. Use them."
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of respect.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're telling them, "Well, you're not capable of making your own decisions about your own life."
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Incredibly disrespectful.
Yeah.
So trying to get that across to parents and friends in a loving, compassionate manner is difficult.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I'm
It's just
curious
difficult.
for you, what was it like? How was your mom's reaction? Because it's so interesting. She didn't love you being a parole officer. Because I do think, as you said, oh gosh, there's so many good things you said, but we know who we are. You said, we know who we are. It's just a matter of how we express that in the world. And so much of, as the people you work with and these folks who are transitioning, it's the people around them who it's the toughest part. And so I'm curious for you, what was that like
Mhm.
with your mom? Was she supportive of your transition?
Initially, I didn't, I don't think she truly understood what I had told her. I'd come out to my sisters first, and a couple months later, um, well, back up a moment. So I was working as a parole officer, and through most of my career in the department, I wore a Marine haircut, shaved on the sides, flat on the top. My hair just stood up beautifully, a little bit of gel, beautiful flat top.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and all of a sudden, my hair started growing, and I started growing out my nails. And once I got onto hormones, there was a little bit of, skin softening and losing some muscle mass. And um, I was sitting here actually at the table I'm sitting at now as I'm talking to you in the kitchen with my mother, my Aunt Catherine. And mother was just asking me question after question after question. I'm just like, it's not time. I can't tell you. It's not ready. And finally, I'm like, all right, if you just want to know, Mama, I've decided that I'm a transgender woman. I'm going to transition and I'm going to change from your son to your daughter. Oh, why don't you go home? So I went home. 2 hours later, I get a phone call from my sister Karen, and she is livid. I thought we were going to wait and do this as a family. And you came in and tell her, and Mama's all upset, and she doesn't want to see you. Don't come over here. Keeping in mind that I think I had talked to my mother every day of my life, either in person or on the phone for the previous 43 years.
Mm.
Um, and so I didn't talk to Mama probably, I think it was about six weeks,
Wow.
and which was excruciating,
I bet.
excruciating.
Mm.
And finally, um, my sister called me and she said, Mama wants to talk to you. My mama said, I love you. You're my child. I want you to come back over to the house, but I never want to see you like that. And I'm only going to call you the name that I gave you. Like, okay, I
Mm.
agreed. So whenever I visited, I just made sure that I kept my hair tied back. I wore baggy jeans and baggy t-shirts, and I would see my mother. And then at the time, my stepfather, Poppy, had cancer. And we were over the house one day because dad had fallen and mom couldn't get him up. And so I was there with my sisters and an aunt and an uncle, a couple cousins to try and figure out, well, how are we going to take care of dad? Are we going to, bring in hospice, and are we going to try and have him at home? And mama has a seizure right there.
Oh my
And she's
gosh.
like, all of a sudden starts shaking. And then, oh my gosh, so she ended up going to the hospital for 3 weeks with a kidney infection.
Oh
And
no.
so I moved into the house and took care of my dad. I had aunts and cousins coming over and helping, but I was a primary caregiver, and my sisters took care of Mama in the hospital. She was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And then when she came home, I was helping with her IVs and everything. I think what convinced her was the fact that I took care of the house exactly the way she did. She raised a daughter.
Mm.
And I think that's why when I eventually moved in with her, we got along so well because I did
Wow.
everything the way she did. Because I
Uh-huh.
learned years ago, don't argue with Mama. She'll get
Uh-huh.
her way, and I'll
Uh-huh.
be gosh darned if she isn't right.
Uh-huh.
And so after Dad died and I moved in, um, we just sat down and had a long talk. And she said, I really don't understand, but you are my daughter.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That
And
gives me
so,
goosebumps.
and so, we lived together for over 15 years, and I miss her dearly.
Mm.
But I haven't changed anything in the house because we built this house together. We furnished this house together.
Mm.
And I am my mother's daughter.
Mm.
And yes, she was opinionated and she wasn't afraid to use her opinion.
Mm.
She was a matriarch of the family.
Mm.
The couple weeks before she died, she had a real rally and she told us who she wanted to talk to. It was essentially all the oldest kids of all of her brothers and sisters. And she sat them and told them how they should be standing up and taking care of their families. And you have to be. I was like sitting there going, oh my gosh, that's stuff that she told me.
Wow.
So yeah, we learned
Wow.
to live together and be together.
That's beautiful. It's such a beautiful story of restored relationship. And I just think of you in those 6 weeks and how awful that must have been. And yet you sat in that and waited that out and gave her that time, as hard
Mhm.
as that must have been, to then bring you both to a place where then she says, you are my daughter. That you saying that just gave me goosebumps because it was like she had this realization of seeing you for who you truly are. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that, no matter where we are at in our own journey of growing up, and I think the parent relationship is so hard because our parents see us
Mhm.
as we were when we were kids, or how they raised us to be, or who they want us to be. And I think so much of the difficulty of really embracing and stepping into our authentic selves is our fear of the reactions of the people around us. And
Mhm.
rightfully so, a lot of times, especially in the in transitioning. But I love that you gave her that space and you were patient with her, and she came to you and had this realization, and that you guys were able to build this strong bond, and you were with her in the last bits of her life. And I am so
Mhm.
sorry for your loss. I know
Thank
that's
you.
really fresh. um we've been, with the pandemic and everything that we collectively have been navigating, there's been so much loss and so much um change of just how we thought things were going to be. I was telling you before we started recording, we had a conference that we were doing every single year in LA, and we had just expanded to doing another one in New York. And 2020 hit, and that we haven't had an in-person conference for 2 years, and I miss
Mhm.
it. And I went to a event a few weeks ago. It was small, but it had kind of like the conference vibes that we have always had at Yellow Conference. If you're listening and you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. And I was so surprised at the amount of grief that I felt after that event. I came home and I was emotionally exhausted. I was so tired, and I just cried because I don't know if I had really given myself space to feel that loss, and just really embrace that was something that I did need to grieve, because it was such a staple in my life. Um so I know that you've been going through a lot of grief
Mhm.
recently, and have experienced a lot of loss. How is that? How have you been working through that?
Honestly, I stepped back from a lot of the work I've been doing, um, resigning my position from a church that I planted called Westview Church in Boulder, Colorado, um, because the congregation members, whom I really believed were fully committed to be a radically inclusive church, meaning that we weren't just going to tell people that they're welcome and then invite them in and we'll teach them how we do things. We want to invite people in and integrate them into the community and find new ways to do things, new ways to celebrate faith, find new ways to be living into what it means to love our neighbor. Um, it just didn't work. And so I resigned. And so still dealing with the grief of that resignation, leaving that community and not feeling supported by leadership in the ELCA, we call it a synod, kind of like a diocese, a region. I just didn't feel supported at all by my bishop or the synod council. And then there's been other issues within the ELCA surrounding racist behavior, and we're uncovering more and more systemic racism. So as a Latina, I don't necessarily feel safe in my church, which really undercuts so much of what I've been doing. My faith in God is as strong as ever. My faith in the church is waning. So what do I do with that? I really don't know. And then Mama got really ill. And so from the middle of November to middle of December, my two sisters moved in and we took care of Mama with the help of hospice, and she passed away. And then on December 30th, I live in Louisville, Colorado, and something called the Marshall Fire, which started off as a grass fire on the western edge of they call a little town called Marshall, Western in so basically it was a grass fire that got out of control, and it swept into the little town of Superior, the unincorporated areas of Boulder County, and then it hit the western edge of my town of Louisville, and over 1,000 homes burned to the ground.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, literally walking through areas that I had walked through before that were filled with houses and kids and dogs and are just nothing. I mean, literally foundations. Dear friends of mine lost their houses where they said there was nothing to salvage. The fires had gotten so hot that everything burned. And so multiple layers of, and I ended up evacuating that day and didn't think my house would survive. But I am grateful that my house did survive. And I'm here now, and I didn't have any smoke damage. I truly believe that my mother protected the house. So I'm recognizing and realizing that with my therapist, yes, I have a therapist, and I have a spiritual director. I believe everybody should have a therapist. Yes, I'm biased, but life is hard. Life is complicated. Life is messy. And I need to sit with my therapist every other week to talk about the stuff that I'm going through. Then I have to talk to my spiritual director about why is God doing this to me, and be able to continue to have conversations with the Lord my God and delve into who I am, one as a beautiful creation of God, and what part I have in creation, and where do I go. And so I've been giving myself the time. I carry about 10 clients right now, people I've worked with for a little while. And they're people that I really want to work with. And then I have 2 people that I supervise right now, probably get a couple more people to supervise in the next month or 2. But I'm doing enough, honestly, to pay the bills. I do get a pension from the state. And so I'm lucky enough where I'm not worried about money. Yeah, I probably should go back to a full-time job fairly soon. But I need to take the time I need to work through this grief, work through this trauma. I have been hit between the eyes by a 2x4 multiple times over the last 6 months. And honestly, I don't know where I'm going to come out on the other end. Part of me wants to run away and never step into a church again. Part of me misses being a pastor so much. I miss going to church every Sunday, and I miss preaching, and I miss sitting with people and navigating with them some of the difficulties and crises that they have. I miss that so much, but I never want to do it again. How do I live into that paradox? I don't know. But the part is, I don't need to know right now. And that's part of just sitting and being. I go back to, there's a story in about Elijah. There's a prophet Elijah who God tells to do great and wonderful things and does great and wonderful things. And all of a sudden he's running into the wilderness because Queen Jezebel wants to cut off his head. And he runs and sits at the base of a broom tree and says, "Kill me now. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's never made any difference. Kill me now." And an angel appears and says, "Take a nap." Elijah lays down, takes a nap. The angel wakes him up, gives him bread and water, sleep a little more. Wakes up, eats some more, and starts wandering in the wilderness, looking for God. In many ways, that's where I feel I am right now. And I need to be right here. I need to be wondering and asking, where am I to go next? And being open to what it could be. I'm open to living in Louisville, Colorado for the rest of my life. I love this house is comfortable. My family has been in this city and this little town for 85 years. I've got cousins and aunts and uncles who still live here. Why should I leave? But part of me is looking at the possibility of there's a large LGBTQ plus nonprofit that I've been thinking about applying for a position with them, which means I might move to Minneapolis or Washington, D.C. or New York or L.A. I don't know, but I can do it now if I want it. Do I want to do that? I don't know. Do I have to decide right now? No.
Wow.
So that's part of taking that deep look and living into the grief and being uncomfortable and allowing myself to cry when I need to cry, allow myself to yell when I need to yell, allow myself to sit and watch The Hobbit and because I watched all 6 movies in 2 days because I needed to,
Yeah.
I just needed to unplug and watch something that I'd seen before, and it wasn't threatening, and I knew how I was going to be, and I just needed to be.
Giving yourself that space, that is profound, truly, because it's completely countercultural. Our culture tells us just produce. Your worth is based on what you are making and what you are doing and your success and your material possessions and your financial situation and all of this like hustle for your worth mentality is so ingrained in us. So I think that's why what you are living into right now is so profound, especially in this culture. And that so many of us, I think, are slowly starting to wake up to. And I think the pandemic has forced a lot of us into this, but to realize we need to slow down and give ourselves space to feel, give ourselves space to take those naps. I love that story about Elijah. I haven't thought about that story in a very long time. And you bringing that back up, I'm reminded of that story and just how take a nap, here's some bread, eat some food and wander. And I think so many of us are in that place right now where we don't know what's next. We have no idea what we're doing. I think that, we're living in the midst of the great recession. Is that what they're calling it? Where
Great resignation.
Great
resignation. Yes.
Yes, the great resignation. And so many people quitting their jobs and not necessarily having a game plan for what's going to be next, but sitting in that and wandering. And it's so hard to do.
Yes. And I think people are starting to recognize they're worth more than what the system is willing to pay for.
Oh, yeah. That's
And,
good.
I've been a part of a lot of decolonization efforts. There's a decolonizing the ELCA and decolonizing Christianity and decolonizing our whole entire system. And it's scary. We don't know what's going to come out on the other side, but we have to try. We really have to look back and look at how did we get where we're at? Who benefited and who paid the price? And is it fair to allow so many of us who were exploited through the years, and us, I mean, me and my ancestors, exploited through the years. My family's became members of, or citizens of the United States in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. Most of my family, both sides of my family, are from northern New Mexico, with the exception of a great grandfather, Giovanni Lorenzi, who came from northern Italy in 1872. But so many of us were told to assimilate, which meant learn English and know your place. And so a lot of my family were, or all of them were farmers or ranchers, or coal miners. They worked the land, worked the field. And now I'm not doing that. I'm doing something completely different. And I'm finding my voice. I'm finding that, if you go down and look, I've done these little things like everybody stands in a line, and if you are white, take a step forward. If you own your own home, take a step forward. And I'm usually towards the back. As a queer transgender Latina, I don't have any power. Any male privilege that I had, I walked away from. And the only power I have is my education. I'm relatively well educated, 2 master's degrees, and my big mouth. And I'm willing to speak up and talk when I feel a need to. But the one thing I do have to say that I totally agree with you is this pandemic has just turned our entire society upside down. That first year in 2020, I was doing a lot of online conferences. I love conferences. I limited my travel to once a month. And so I've spoken across the country and in church halls and big, huge cathedrals and ballrooms, and I just love it. And then when the pandemic hit, everything went online. I was recording sermons, and I was, appearing on Zoom conferences and such. But in 2021, I kind of ran out of steam, and I've done a few. This is a first podcast I've done, I think, this year. Because I haven't really wanted to. I expected to be back in person.
Yeah.
And I was doing all the work, doing a 90-minute workshop or a 15, 20-minute talk. I was doing all the work, and then I would leave and come in and watch Days of Our Lives with Mama. What I love about conferences isn't necessarily the speaking or the teaching. It's sitting in the hotel lobby, having a conversation with somebody I just met, or going out to dinner with a dear friend that I've been working with for the last 10 years. Those are the conversations that are gold.
Yeah.
That's where you make the connections. That's where you get the new ideas. That's where you plant seeds. Not necessarily in me standing in front and telling a little bit about my story. It's the hotel lobbies and the restaurants. That's where the real work happens. And that's what I miss so much.
Yeah. It's those in between moments that we don't have Like I taught a class at a university last semester. My background's in graphic design and I taught a Photoshop class. And I really felt for these students having to do this digitally because so much of the experience of college, and especially these are really young kids, is those in between moments when you're walking out of class and you're asking someone, hey, I didn't really get that, what she just said. Can you help me? Or what, I missed that. Or you're in so-and-so's class, they didn't catch the assignment. Just these in between moments that we didn't get because they log on. I started teaching and then they logged off. I eventually kind of started to bring in, I tried to kind of let it lag a little bit and say, if anyone has questions or just wants to hang out and do some work on Zoom for a little while, please do. And some started to take me up on it, but it's those in between moments that I miss those too so much. And that's always been my favorite part of events and conferences too. It's like the late night talks in the hotel and the drinks after, the conference is over. And yeah, we miss a lot of that.
I was facilitating a conversations. So in the Luther Seminary where I got my MDiv, they have something called Christian Public Leadership, which is essentially field education, which has been totally turned on top of its head since people haven't been able to place in congregations for the last couple of years. Or if they have, a lot of it's been online. So there was about 8 students in my class the last couple semesters that I was facilitating conversations, and we would have a syllabus and you have to cover these things. But the last couple semesters, I would just get together with students. I'm like, we are looking at the complete recreation of what church can be. The greatest fear right now is people won't come back into the building. For 2 millennia, we built church around buildings and built some beautiful buildings. Everything was all about the building. Everything was about Sunday morning, all the pastors and priests putting on our finery and our stoles and saying the words and lifting it. And that was church. And then you have fellowship afterwards. And that isn't happening. Not like it used to. It's all online. For, a year and a half, I did an online live on Twitch TV service. And I got proficient. I couldn't say good, but I got proficient at preaching to a camera. So I learned when to look straight into the camera and, how to use my voice and how to use the microphone. And it's not like preaching in person. But I said with these people, I'm like, the church that you're going to lead isn't the church that you grew up in. So what are you afraid of? What are you looking forward to? How can you be the leaders of a church that hasn't been created yet?
Ooh, that's good.
And so we had some incredible conversations.
Wow.
And that's what we have to look at as a society. My degree is in Jesus, not medicine, so I can't tell you what this COVID thing is going to do. I hear everything from every year we're going to get a flu/COVID shot because it's going to be around forever. That old Nietzschean phrase, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Well, COVID had changed that to, if it doesn't kill you, it mutates, it comes back and tries again.
Yeah.
So now we're on Omicron. I'm just waiting for the Omega strain to come through and just, kill us all off.
Oh, goodness.
I just don't know how we're going to be coming back as a society, as a country, once we can. And that's what's scary right now. I don't know what church is going to look like. My hope and right now is I sit on the board of directors of a group called Boulder County, which is an LGBTQ plus advocacy organization in Boulder County, Colorado. We just bought a new building. So we're raising funds. We went from a 1,400 square foot building to 9,500 square feet, have 3 levels. We have a dedicated level strictly for youth. LGBTQ youth now have their own space in the Boulder County Community Center. And there is a perfect space to meet for some sort of service. So when I was approached and asked, what do you think this could be? Could we do church here? I'm like, no, we're not doing church. What I want to build is a queer, interfaith, spiritual community.
Mm.
And I reached out to some of my friends who are pastors and a rabbi and looking for someone from the Muslim community. And how can we really bring together an interfaith group of people and ask the questions of who do we want to be? So many young people that I talk to want to explore spirituality, but they're too afraid to walk into church because of the times that they have walked into a church and told you're going to hell for doing what you're doing. I don't want to recreate that. I don't want to be anything close to that. I want to be able to have young people come in and say, this is what I believe in. And as an ELCA pastor and as ordained pastor, I want to be able to say to them, let's talk about that. What does it mean to you? What joy does it give you? What hope does it give you? If I truly, truly believe in a God that is all powerful, all knowing, can do anything, that created every leaf on every branch of every tree, which gave us the air that we breathe and the fire that warms us and the fire that destroys the earth, I know my God speaks to me through Jesus. And la Virgen de Guadalupe. I'm a fiercely devoted to the Mary, the Mother of God, in the form of the Virgen de Guadalupe. That's another 45-minute story I'll get into sometime. But that's how I relate to my God. That's what gives me hope. And frankly, I just don't know why everybody isn't Lutheran, because I think Lutheran theology is the bomb. It's just incredible. But guess what? I have dear friends who are Jewish. And I have dear friends who are conservative, who are Reformed, and in a renewal congregation. And they all have valid ways of seeing Yahweh, seeing their God, of seeing Adonai, Elohim. And I know people who are Muslim who see God through Muhammad. Who am I to say that that is wrong? Everybody should be able to approach their creator, their deity, their spirituality in a way that they can understand. Some of us will gather as Lutherans, some of us will gather as Presbyterians, some of us will gather in a renewal Jewish congregation, and some people will sit on Sunday morning going, I wonder what I believe in. I got to get to a soccer match now.
Wow. You're talking about, what does the future of the church look like? In these ideas of, an interfaith spiritual community, I really do believe, and this is in so many areas right now across the board, politics, religion, so many schools, right? Education, so many threads are being pulled and the unraveling has begun. And I feel like we're kind of we're in the unraveling, right? We're in the messiness of it all. And I think, and I hear what you are doing is reimagining the future, reimagining a better world for the marginalized and the oppressed and these folks who have been traditionally pushed to the side and in the back. How can we reimagine a future where we're all lifted up, where all faiths are able to join and be together, and we can be together in our differences and love exists among us and abounds, right? And as scary as what we are in right now is, because it's so uncertain and so unknown, hearing you speak and reimagining the future also gets me excited, because we have such an opportunity to create meaningful forward movement. And, not that that's easy whatsoever, but there is a true opportunity here. And I see you as a leader in that, especially in the church and in faith communities. Last question, as we have to wrap up here. I feel like I could talk to you all day about so many things. What advice would you give to someone who is really struggling with stepping out and owning who they are and living in the fullness of their authentic self? What bit of advice or thought would you give that person?
Well, again, I'm biased. Have a good therapist. Have somebody that you can trust implicitly to be able to talk through what you're thinking about. When we have the tendency to let things just bounce around in our heads, and when you say it out loud, it takes on a different flavor, and you can look at things from many different angles. So have people in your life that you can truly trust and talk about. And I know so many people, well, I tried therapy once and it didn't work. Find the right therapist, interview 2 or 3 people, and find the person that you feel that there is some sort of connection, that your therapeutic relationship is so important. Someone that you feel that you can sit down and just tell them everything and not be judged, but supported.
Mm.
And have faith in yourself. Right now, I'm dealing with so much anxiety and depression, and people are going through so much trauma. It's hard to trust yourself.
Mhm.
It really, really is, especially when we're all making decisions on with information that is constantly changing, and we don't know who to believe.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's so hard to tell. I don't even watch broadcast TV anymore, except Days of Our Lives and Young and the Restless. Mom and I were always stuck on the soaps. But find people around you that you can trust, who can support you and love you, and explore your spirituality.
Mm.
Set time aside um, to sit in quiet, or to say prayers, or to do something that nurtures your soul.
Such good advice. Thank you so much, Reverend Nicole. It's been such an honor and a pleasure to speak with you this morning. Please keep in touch. I can't wait for our community to hear your words. So thank you again.
You're so welcome. And I want to leave you with one little quote from St. Francis of Assisi. And this talks about the sacraments he talks about are those that are sacred in the church and to people. I once spoke to my friend, an old squirrel, about the sacraments. He got so excited and ran into a hollow in his tree and came back holding some acorns, an owl feather, and a ribbon he had found. And I just smiled and said, "Yes, dear, you understand. Everything imparts God's grace."
Mm.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nicole.
So welcome.